Hi, friends of the planet. Miro here. Today we have a special guest, my husband, Kurt Bardella, who you might see on MSNBC, along with his work with the Lincoln Project and whatever else is on his resume. I feel like I've forgotten already the list. But we wanted to talk to him a bit about the situation we find ourselves in now as a country. We are recording this Wednesday afternoon, and Reverend Raphael Warnock has been projected to be the winner of the special Senate election in Georgia. Chances are looking good for Jon Ossoff, but the race has not been predicted yet by all outlets. Some people have called it. So we just kind of wanted to talk about what this means. And at the same time, we find ourselves in the middle of an armed conflict at the Capitol. So there's a lot happening, and I want to take a little pause and maybe talk through some of these issues. So Kurt, thanks so much for being here from the other room.
Always great to be on with you and Monica, of course.
Kurt, I wanted to ask, in terms of these likely Senate wins, I don't know, what are chances looking like for Ossoff at this point as of Wednesday afternoon?
I think pretty good. I mean, when you look at the votes that are outstanding and are coming in, they're from Democrat areas. And we're seeing, too, that the mail-in vote going back to November has always trended overwhelmingly for the Democrats. So I know they haven't officially called it yet, but I think everybody, including the Senate Republicans, are operating with the understanding that the majority is gone to the Democrats with these two wins in Georgia.
Yeah, the difference now seems to be nearly 20,000 votes, and that seems to be insurmountable for Senator Perdue. It does seem like the end is near for Republican majority in the Senate.
But it'll still be really slim. So I wanted to ask, there's not going to be 60 votes straight from Democrats in this Senate. In terms of climate legislation, that's of interest to us as Our Daily Planet. What do you think the chances are to pass something comprehensive? Because Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia mentioned that he would not vote for filibuster reform. So they're going to have to get those 60 votes for a lot of these things to pass. So is there a pathway to that? Is there a pathway to bipartisanship? Like how, progressive could legislation look like coming out of the Senate?
I think that part of what's going to happen, if I were the Democrats in Congress, I would try to attach some of these important pieces of legislation, some of which were kind of the construct of the Green New Deal. And what will be must-pass legislation, there's going to be another round of COVID stimulus legislation that's going to have to move forward. The soon-to-be Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's already said that they want to have a vote on $2,000 stimulus checks. There's going to be a lot of work to be done on the economy, and some of those must-pass pieces of legislation are opportunities, I think, for Senate Democrats to attach climate proposals. And in part, it gives some of these Democrats like Joe Manchin, as well as moderate Republicans, cover to support these proposals without paying the political price for supporting them. For anyone who wants to attack them, they can say, well, I was voting for COVID relief, for stimuluses, supporting small businesses. It was an economy vote, not a quote unquote climate change vote. And I think by doing it that way, they have a better chance of getting things through. I think a lot of the ground that's going to be gained on climate is going to come from executive action, from President Biden and from the White House. And we've certainly already seen in just the way that he has constructed his cabinet, whether it's having former Secretary of State John Kerry now play, this unique role of kind of, climate envoy, I guess, as well as putting Mayor Pete at the Department of Transportation, someone who's been very vocal about climate change from the moment that he stepped on the national stage. I think that it's going to be a priority of this administration. I think it's going to be a big part of the Biden legacy ultimately. And he will be able to do things that won't have to rely on Congress necessarily. The one thing where having the majority matters is that at least when Democrats put forward legislation, they can actually get a vote on it. They can actually move it through committee and get markup and get the process at least moving forward to try to get some momentum for some of their policies.
Yeah, and for their appointees as well. It's hard to staff a government without your nominations getting through. And that would have been a huge stumbling block if the Republicans had maintained control, because they could make every nominee an opportunity to negotiate on something else. But I wonder if you think, Kurt, especially looking at it from your vantage point at the Lincoln Project, that there's a chance for bipartisanship given what we're watching right now unfold in real time at the Capitol. How much is this breaking bipartisanship, and can the Lincoln Project actually help heal some of the divisions in the Republican Party, or at least move to a new iteration of the Republican Party?
Just to give a little context, I know that Lincoln Project is going to take up holding corporations accountable, not necessarily on climate issues, but for their financial support of this MAGA faction of the Republican Party.
That's part of the key is continuing to exert public pressure on our political figures. And the way you do that most effectively is you look at the people who fund them. Politicians aren't always moved by the court of public opinion. If they were, climate change legislation would already be there because that's where the public is. But they are moved by the people who fill their coffers and buy money. And so one of the unique things about the Lincoln Project's approach to trying to hold our dear Republicans accountable for what they have been a part of the last 4 years is to target the major corporations that are funding them. And I think that a lot of how we go about trying to project influence in the political process is a model that a lot of the other environmental and climate groups could duplicate. We were talking about this earlier, Miro and I don't know why some of these entities wait until election time to run ads, focusing on policies, focusing on members of Congress. I would start running campaigns and running persuasion ads the minute that this Congress becomes effective and sworn in about climate change and what the stakes are. And if you can start moving them and impacting them earlier in the process, not just at election time, you also, I think, have a better chance of moving public opinion with you, because we all know that during election time, you're inundated with ads and mailers and phone calls and text messages, and you kind of tune it all out. But if you are able to start doing things when there isn't all that noise, you have a better chance of being heard. And when I look at groups, whether it's Tom Steyer and NextGen or our friends over at Climate Power, there's an opportunity very early on in this new presidency and this new Congress to shape the debate and to put together a list of proposals and ideas that in one unified voice, working with people like League of Conservation of Voters, for example, that they could put an agenda together and fight for that right now, and at least kind of stake your claim to what policies you want. And that could also be very impactful at moving the needle forward.
How far do you think Biden and his team can push executive power? You've seen that from the other side from your time on the Hill. But this time with a Democratic Congress, maybe they can push it a little farther, particularly given how much Trump kind of went out of his way to use his executive power. Or do you think that's not advisable?
We've just seen 4 years of executive overreach, the likes of which we haven't seen, certainly in my lifetime, in my opinion, where the soon-to-be former President Trump stretched the limits of constitutional and executive authority, and the Republicans sat there and let it happen. And so I'm always of the mindset that turnabout is fair play. And if Republicans in Congress are going to obstruct a Biden agenda, particularly on the clear and present danger that is the climate crisis, it is absolutely within the President Biden's right to use the powers of his office, whether it's declaring a climate state of national emergency and unlocking different things through that vehicle, whether it's through executive order, really undoing a lot of the damage that Trump has done through executive order. I think that Biden should be aggressive. I think that he should be not shy about wielding executive power, because this is the trap that I think Democrats oftentimes run into. Republicans don't hesitate. They don't care about consequences. They don't care about the institution. They just want it their way, and they will do it and let the chips fall where they will. I think that Biden has license to do the same thing. The only difference is Biden's actually going to be using his authority for good, not for bad. He's going to be using it to address these real threats and problems and not exacerbating them.
I actually think part of the problem with Trump was also the way he used those extensive executive powers. I don't think an emergency is such a far-fetched thing as long as you justify it and you explain and you do things in a way that gives the public notice and an opportunity to be heard and doesn't cut so many corners. Part of what needs to be distinct between what Trump did to push his executive powers and what Biden might do is, this sense of there is a right way to do those things, because those powers are there for a reason.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at just, again, we're talking about clean air, clean water, dealing with, wildfires and floods and 100-year storms. And, I don't know about you, but to me, those
children
are all
not being able to breathe.
It's like, what could be more important than dealing with those things? And so, particularly when we know in the next 12 months, there's going to be hurricanes, there's going to be storms, there's going to be disasters that will, whatever we're talking about the day before, will completely derail our attention and focus, just as it has. And how nice will it be that we won't have someone in the the Oval Office who will be using a Sharpie to redraw the path of a hurricane, who will activate resources the minute that they are needed, not based on, well, I don't like the state of California, so I'm gonna withhold resources or play politics or tell them to manage their forest better to explain away wildfires. I think that all of those events that will certainly happen also will give the president and his entire administration and all the Department of Energy, Transportation, EPA, NOAA, et cetera, it will give them the license to take action in those moments, and both proactively as well as undoing the things that Trump has done.
So I want to follow up on that really quickly, in that there are these young, very well-spoken cabinet secretaries that Biden will appoint when he becomes president. So I'm thinking of Pete Buttigieg and Jennifer Granholm and Reagan at EPA. And I'm wondering, if you were, to give your advice here, how do you best leverage these, really very competent people, but also great media personalities to kind of help drive this message that President Biden had on the campaign trail, that action on climate is a jobs opportunity. It's an opportunity to rebuild the things that have been crumbling in our nation, like infrastructure, so it doesn't just become a running joke and we actually do something about it. What would be your advice to best use these, players, I guess?
This is why I am so excited about Pete Buttigieg as transportation secretary. I don't think that we've ever had a transportation secretary who actually already had a national profile. Usually cabinet secretaries aren't particularly known by the American people in any major way. I mean, there's kind of the big four, right? Secretary of Defense and Attorney General, all that. But so much of the work actually happens is a little bit lower down on the food chain here. And having that star power there, I think, creates an incredible opportunity. And when you look at transportation particularly, the largest source of pollution is pollution from vehicles. And when you look at areas where climate and the economy and the environment come together, transportation is one of those places. Infrastructure is one of those places. I mean, I think that we're in infrastructure week still, right? That was the ongoing joke of the Trump president, infrastructure week. Well, now we can actually do something. When you talk about both repairing the economy in a post-COVID world and building an economy that is for the 21st century, infrastructure and transportation is the place where that can all happen.
Huge. That electric Mustang,
oh my gosh.
that, Tesla stock price.
So do you get Mayor Pete on TV? Like what?
I make Mayor Pete the poster child for both climate and the economy. I marry the two together through Mayor Pete and aggressively promote him. And again, he is such a great communicator and such a gifted communicator. More importantly, he is someone who can communicate with a very broad array of ideological people. He knows how to talk to Midwest folks. He knows how to talk to Fox News folks. He knows how to talk to MSNBC folks. And there aren't many people who can bridge all of those divides and worlds. And when you talk about trying to build a coalition and consensus to get something done, Mayor Pete's the perfect ambassador to make that happen.
Likewise, are there young members of Congress, besides the ones we probably heard about, who you think should be stepping up now?
I think there are. One of the things when I think of the squad, obviously, a lot of the times, in terms of just young, dynamic, big following. They're more known, I feel like, for broader political themes, but not a particularly specific policy agenda. They were obviously big proponents of the Green New Deal overall. But when I think about the importance, and really this has been a deficiency for Democrats, of, again, convincing the American people that a good climate policy is a good economic policy. If the Democrats can find a way to activate the squad, to be messengers of climate and the economy, I think that can go a really long way to reframing how this issue is really thought about and talked about, and how it can be used to motivate the younger base. When I think about entities like, I guess, the Sunrise Movement's a good example of this. They're very loud, they're very vocal and visible, but I think that they've been very unsuccessful at actually getting their agenda through in a substantive, tangible way. I would like to see the squad, who has a very good relationship with the Sunrise Movement, move them towards a more substantive direction. And what an impactful thing would be if you could take the squad and Mayor Pete, soon to be Secretary Pete, and have them promote an agenda of climate and the economy together. That's something that could get something done.
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting thing to see if they can make that pivot. They were in the majority in the House, but running up against the president and the Senate, but now they have to lead. And
right. And it's always easier
make that pivot
to campaign for these things. But once you get them, that's when the real hard work starts.
Yeah, winning is easy, governing is harder, right?
That's right. That's right.
As if it were easy.
Nothing is easy,
I mean,
as we've seen.
I actually am really excited to see the new senators from Georgia, actually, given how much
as a
focus
Georgian
they've
yourself,
had. As a Georgian, I mean, to hear my home cities and counties being called out, to see Georgia come through and to change, and to see people like Stacey Abrams, really exciting to see new leadership come to Washington. Someone who's been here a while.
And again, it's like newer leadership and new people offers such different perspectives. All due respect to the Nancy Pelosi's, Jim Clyburn, Steny Hoyers of the world, their worldview about climate could be very different than John Ossoff or Connor Lamb, right, or any of these other folks who have come in the last few years. For people certainly of my generation, climate has been a part of our conversation for the entirety of our adult life. When you're kind of born and bred with that, you accept it more easily, I feel like. I think part of the challenge for Republicans has been they've been the party of old people for so long that this has never been an issue they've ever really had to think about or care about, that it's a lot harder to penetrate that wall. Whereas Democrats have been younger, more diverse, and frankly, they come from communities that are impacted much more harshly, particularly communities of color, by the effects of climate change.
Do you think there are Republicans who will be open to this, really specifically young Republicans who we can bring into the tent of environment and climate and conservation? I'm
tough
optimistic.
ask here.
Yeah.
It's so tough to predict whether that's possible or not. You would think that someone like Marco Rubio from Florida, ground zero of this climate crisis, would be one of the biggest champions about, because it's his state that's going to get walloped harder than almost any other.
Already is.
Right?
Sunny day flooding in Miami.
Or all of these Midwestern senators, we saw these catastrophic floods several months ago that wiped out millions of acres of farmland and people's livelihoods, and still they would not budge at all on this issue.
And so it's like, I go, if that doesn't move those people, it's hard for me to be optimistic about moving anybody else. It's unfortunately, it's a case of one of those things where I think it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better as far as Republicans coming around to it. The good news is public opinion has come around a huge difference over the last decade, in my opinion, where climate change used to be something that was mocked by a lot of Republicans particularly. But even now, I think that there's at least a willingness of accepting, yes, climate change is real. Yes, climate change is happening. And yes, a lot of these people are seeing the effects of it in their own backyard. And so if you can get the people there, I think the people will get there before the politicians as usual. But having the people move in that direction in the long run tells us that we will get there at some point. I just hope that we get there in time.
Well, we need a Lincoln Project to, affect the levers of money that keep these people in office and enable their denial of climate issues.
Hey, if I were some of these environmental groups, I would call the Lincoln Project and say, hey, why don't you make us some ads that'll get some attention on this?
I think that will be really an interesting possibility. And who knows? I mean, it's a new day. So thank you, Kurt, so much. We really appreciate all your political smarts and your experience around these issues and all your support for Our Daily Planet, one of the original friends of the planet. We can't thank you enough for helping us to, kind of bring this issue to our readers and viewers.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thanks, see you guys soon.
Hey, Kurt, one last thing. Leslie Jones.
Oh.
She likes those bookshelves behind you. She was really into them. I think we have to at least link to that hysterical critique of your appearance at 4 a.m.
That's when you know you've made it, Monica. When Leslie Jones takes to social media and critiques your setting. That was the highlight of my year.
I'm going to take credit for styling that bookshelf, though. So
I know. I think you should.
Well manicured.
Yeah.
Fresh as a daisy.